Talofa my lofas, this is your girl AfroTeine, and I am here today with the Koviki Talk takeover with Tacadena. Yes? And we're just gonna have a talk amongst friends like I've been doing with you before. Um, Brandon was raised in Mililani, Hawaii. He has familiar ties to the islands of Tokelau, Samoa, the Philippines, and Germany. Brandon holds a BA in Bible and Christian ministry from Pacific Rim Christian University and an MDiv in systematic theology and social ethics from Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. He currently serves as a program manager for the Allender Center, a nonprofit in association with within the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. Brandon's interests include Pacifica identity and spirituality, post-colonialism, decoloniality, empire critical studies of the Bible, liberation theologies, eco-theologies, and indigenous farming and gardening. But I just call him friend. So, Brandon, how are you doing today?
I know that was a mouthful. Thanks, Dacia, for having me on here. I love that you called me friend. I mean, y'all don't understand how long I've been listening to AfroTeine Speaks, and I'm like, I want to be her friend. And then I found out we have like weird connections with like APU and all these other relationships. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here on Koviki Talks. Really love Carl and Naki and the work that you folks do at Pacifica by Design.
Yes, and thank you for shouting out Carl and Naki. We love them to death. Good people that do good work, and I'm just anytime they call, anytime they want anything, I am there. And that just speaks to who they are as people because they're always there. They're the dependable voices that we hear every week. They let us know what's going on in the now, what's currently happening, and they also give, space on their platform for other people to have talks. And that's why we're here on Koviki Talk, just to remind you that, hey, Pacifica people, we're still dealing with COVID. We still have to give little reminders as to, why we have to live the way we have to live, to make sure that you're mindful of your health because we want you here. We can't cause change if you're not here. And so we want to make sure that you're here, you're around, and you're protecting your family and your friends. So we would like to remind you to make time for your health so you don't lose time for things you love. An updated COVID vaccine restores protection that has decreased over time, including protection against severe illness, hospitalization, and the worst effects of COVID. If your last COVID vaccine or booster was before September 2022, it's time for an updated vaccine. You could find an updated COVID vaccine at vaccines.gov. Again, it's vaccines, V as in Victor, ACCINES.gov. We can do this. So go out there, look up your updated vaccines, but for the most part, just be mindful because we want you around so you could make the world a better place. As an icebreaker for our Koviki kind of FICA Koviki Talk, I wanted to bring up a kind of an icebreaker question like, what are the 5 things, just 5 quick things you're grateful for?
Yeah, that's a good question. In my mind, I'm like, do I be serious or do I be like funny?
No,
but
it could be anything.
I think the first thing I was thinking that the immediate thought in my mind was, I am so grateful for Korean barbecue.
Oh my
Like,
God.
I just think Koreans can throw down, and I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, y'all just know what you're doing, so I support that. Naki's like, oh yes. I'm grateful for. I know this is like very like out there, and people are like, I'm grateful for air. I think when you think about the process of like oxygen and like the reciprocal relationships that happens with plants, I'm like, it's so deep, but it's so simple. Like we just, it just happens naturally. So I'm grateful for air, especially in the times when I feel like right now, like anxiety because I'm on here and I want to mess it up. But grateful for air. I'm grateful for community. There was a recent thing that just happened in our community with one of our community members, and it was really fascinating to see how quickly people just like gather together to like support with resources, with prayers. Um, the resiliency of community. It's really, really grateful for that. Um, I'm grateful for my mother. My mother just came to mind. I just, as I get older, I think more and more about like the struggles that she went through to raise four children on her own,
Mm.
and the sacrifices that she made. And I think a lot of the work that I do is really inspired by just the life that she's lived. Shout out to my mom, Ramona Jennings or Ramona Tacadena out there. Really grateful for her. And then the last one, I'm just grateful for. Um, I'm grateful for you, actually, Dacia. And I don't. That's not like something like me being,
I'm gonna cry.
like. When I say that I've been a faithful listener of AfroTeine Speak, like your podcast, I'm really grateful for the topics that you bring. I'm really grateful for the work that you do behind the scenes. I don't think people realize like how much intentionality you put into like crafting these things, the editing, the post production, and all of it to like not make money. Like I remember a conversation. I remember a
Exactly
conversation
zero
that I had with
dollars.
you where I was like, you should monetize this. And you're like, that's not what I'm trying to do. And I respect you so much for that. But also just because you're just a really, really, really good person. And again, those are the findings I'm grateful for.
That's a wonderful list. Anytime I'm on a list with mom and Korean barbecue, that's like the top two Hall of Fame answers right there. I very much appreciate you saying that. Sometimes when I'm on my podcast or when I was on my podcast, I just felt like I was talking to myself, which was fine because it's another way of recording stories. Like God forbid, like way down the road when we're gone, people will look at these Koviki Talks and these Pacifica by Design episodes and be like, wow, these people were awesome. Or hopefully these conversations will spur or inspire somebody in the future and be like, oh, I could be a theology student, or I could, I could be in social work. I could do all these things. So that's a wonderful list. My list is not as deep, but you made me go as deep.
Let's
I
go.
I am grateful for pepperoni and sausage pizza with extra cheese, deep dish. No, we're not discussing deep and thin. It's a deep dish pizza. I'm so sorry. I am grateful for music. In the times where I don't have words, like a song, there's always a song that could just hit at the core of how you're feeling, even though you would have never thought to arrange words in that way. Like it happens, and it is so universal because I've been in rooms where there were like me and four other people from different countries, different languages, don't know nothing, but a song plays and all of a sudden we're crying, and then we're like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
it's understood. So I wish I could vibrate like music in that way where like people could just hear me, what I'm trying to convey without getting mixed up in all the other stuff. I am grateful for the sun. We were pretty kind of rainy and overcast. And I don't even like sunny days like that. I like overcast days. True Bay Area girl. Like, give me overcast, cool, layers, a scarf, and I'm good. But something about when the sun hits your skin and it's like a hug from the inside out sometimes when you're just basking in the sun. And I didn't know you could be sick if you don't get enough vitamin D or like enough sun rays. So
Yeah.
like you and the air thing, like plants are the same way too. There are plants that thrive in the sun, plants that don't like the
Yep.
sun, but like we have to kind of treat each other like the organisms that we are. We need to be sunned out sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm
Try
grateful
switching.
for
Over here in Seattle, dying, but it's okay.
yeah.
God is still present.
Come to Texas, I'll host you. Um, I'm grateful for steak and for sleep because it usually follows one another. So eat steak, then I go to sleep. It's a good way to be. I just came off a Lent, so I like didn't have meat the whole Lent.
Wow.
And if y'all don't know out there, my Koviki people, I will fry a pterodactyl's wing if you give it to me.
Wait, like fish too? You didn't eat fish?
I ate I ate fish. I did eat fish, but I'm not too much of a seafood person because it
Mm,
takes too much to make. I like to
yeah.
marinate a meat, slap it on the grill, rice,
So
or
that's.
fai or calo. Like that's me. Or fry up some pisupo onions and like I just couldn't
Mm,
have all of that. But I'm grateful for that time of being off of it because it made me realize like, oh, maybe I'm too dependent on meat or
yeah.
oh, this is what my body feels like when it's not trying OD to process meat.
Yeah.
I felt like I had space. Did you participate in Lent at all or a form of it?
I think this year around, I'm a member of like Berean Presbyterian. Shout out to Pastor Lena Thompson. I this time around I joined a Lenten group, and it was pretty fruitful. I feel like I think in that space got to like process a lot of feelings with what's been going on lately in our political climate, but then also just be real and talk about like I'm depressed and this is what I'm going through. So
Oh, that is a, I mean, to say that you're depressed is a very, it's a shocking statement for Pacifica people, I believe. This month is April and it's National Poetry Month.
mm,
And so today, which is so weird, I think that's because we're on the same wavelength. Before we started the show, I wrote down a couple lines. It said, Depression. Don't tell anyone you're sad. They will accuse you of being lazy. Depression is just an excuse for you not to do for hours.
I need to hear this whole poem now. Like I think the
I
crowd
was
needs to hear
literally
this.
just writing it before we got on. So the fact that you picked that up, I was because I get profoundly sad sometimes. And that's what
Yeah.
like during COVID and the shutdown, I thought I was very antisocial until I didn't have the choice to be social. And then I was like, oh, what now I'm like super isolated. And so I'll have these seasons where I'm like low, they just feel
Mm.
low. You just want to mope around. Like what did you have those moments during like the when COVID first happened, when the shutdowns were happening? Like what was your feeling at that time and how has it changed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think back to when shutdowns first happened. Um, I'm like, this is a story you didn't ask for, but you invited me to this place, so obviously you asked for it. Um, so when COVID hit, I was actually in New York City, and I remember thinking to myself like, oh, I was in school, thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, it's nothing, it'll blow over. And I went home for a spring break, and then that's when it got really bad in the city, and so I ended up staying in Hawaii, and I was there for about a year. And I just remember thinking, I just graduated. I'm the first one in my family with a master's degree. Can't even go to a graduation ceremony because everything shut down. In addition to that, I think we were kind of in 2019. We had like a very like major life shift. My little brother had passed away, and so it was a combination of COVID and the isolation, but then also just other factors that were contributing to my own feelings of depression. But like Naki says it here in the comments, like to name it is brave, and it is brave. It's not. I think there's a lot like what you were saying earlier. I think there's a lot of misconceptions in the Pacifica community about what depression is, and I think there needs to be more space for that. But for me, it's this feeling. I'm like, how would I describe this? It's this feeling of like you just don't know what to do. It's this feeling of like, how do I move? How do I get out of my bed? I think that was like a big one. How do I get out of my bed today? Like, how do I, like what happens, what am I supposed to do with my life? It becomes very existential. It becomes very bodily. It manifests emotionally. Like there's all these factors that are happening. And it's like, I remember at like, again, the depths of my depression, I was thinking about like one of these theologians, this Palangi theologian, and how like, you know, if I just get up out of bed and make my bed today, like that's helpful. Like that's a victory in of itself. Like if I find good food and feed myself, like that's a victory in of itself. Like thinking what are small actionable items that I can do to
Mm.
achieve, and then also just be able to like feel like I'm not just not doing anything. Yeah, and I think I think the other part of it too with depression, I don't know if you want to chime in on this either, is just like having people to talk about or talk with. Um, I feel like a common theme that I've experienced as in the Pacifica community is like people diminishing, like where you are. If like, oh, you're depressed, like get over it, pray, or all these things. But
Yeah.
having someone to like sit with you and like really process out these feelings, like like what's going on, where are you, what's your body, that was really really helpful. And it looked differently, I think. And you were part of this too, like the community that was happening on Clubhouse, that social media app that was like booming in 2020. I think that was a huge space where we got to kind of convene. A lot of people, Pacific people, got to convene and just have conversations.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a huge tangent.
That's great. I think not with just depression, but during the time or just during these COVID times, like social media has been the saving grace in connecting people that didn't feel connected. There are certain things, especially when it's dealing with depression, that I can't talk to my family about because it's just, your family, they who love you, they want to find you an answer. They want to tell you exactly like, oh, pray on it and you'll feel better. Or maybe you just need to drink water, go outside and just go for a walk. Like they want to give you an answer for things that may not have an answer. Sometimes you have to just go through those moments because your brain is doing something that needs to do it. Like you kind of just need to process it. But I've always said in the Samoan language, Fatmalosi is a double-edged sword. Famalosi could make or break you. But the times I've heard Fatmalosi, which means, be strong or, muscle through it, was like, hey, don't cry because you crying makes me uncomfortable and I don't know how to deal with you being sad. Like we're never prepared for what to do when people are sad or depressed or, just feeling in those low moments. We're never taught that. We're taught to celebrate. We're taught to how to organize these big things, or when funerals and things happen, we're taught all of the tasks that go into the event, but we're not taught to process the event. So you'll find a lot of people who will have these like week-long funerals, but don't cry until the next year when the memorial comes up because they're not busy. They're not busying themselves and distracted. So when it comes to depression or sadness, I talking with people is great. But social media made me kind of like, okay, I could scroll through and see a video of a baby laughing, and then I was like, oh, okay, there's laughter in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's something funny, but you can end up doom scrolling. Were there any like you can end up doom scrolling and picking up bad habits? During the shutdown, I picked up a lot of bad habits in terms of like, I don't know, doom scrolling, staying up to like 6 a.m. and then having to be at work 10 a.m., things like that, not sleeping, not eating well. But has your, how have you dealt with it? Has your feeling changed, or are you still working through like the depression and the sadness and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes in waves, right? Like this particular one, I think just this last year in general was a really difficult year, but I think a lot of it too that I'm very mindful of is like knowing that I grew up in Hawaii in the sun and being surrounded by the water and the mountains and the greenery. It's a completely different shift, right, than living here in Seattle, where I would say 3/4 of the year it's raining, overcast, and just being aware of like those like geographical like shifts, but then also just for me, I theologize everything. So like it's spiritual as well. Like what is my connection to this land? Like how am I responding to this? But seasonal affective disorder is a thing, like the seasons have an effect on our bodies. And like you were saying, right, like our bodies need vitamin D, right? And so if we're not getting sufficient enough vitamin D from the sun, like a thing that we could do is take vitamin D tablets, which I started doing. But it's just it's so fascinating to me that like like seasonal affective disorder, and then also just thinking like how did indigenous people like First Nations people, like what was their whole thought process around the seasons, and like how did they adapt and change? Like it's always like been a curiosity of mine. But yeah, and then another thing that you mentioned too that I kind of want to highlight was like how people respond in the midst of like pain, loss, suffering. It's always, I think for me, having gone through loss, but then also like working as a chaplain in the hospital, you know, there's this thing that we talk about where it's like this category of like spiritual bypassing, right? Something tragic happens, and you know, as Pacifica people, a lot of us, you know, we grew up in the church, and we know that like we're always taught that the first thing to do is pray and whatnot. And I was thinking about this. It's funny that you mentioned it, but I was thinking about this on my drive home the other day. But it's like, you know, we're taught it's not diminishing God's capacity to do healing, but I think it's also recognizing that like we're still embodied in our flesh, and that these
Mhm.
emotions that we feel, right, depression, sadness, anxiety, loneliness, like those are very real human things. And I think you know, like I'm thinking about like, sorry, getting Jesus here, but I just preached on Easter or Good Friday, but like those are also things that Jesus experienced. And for us to just kind of not sit with that emotion and sit with people while they're in that, and just kind of be like, well, you just need to pray harder, or you just need to like fast, or you just need to read your Bible. Like sometimes those aren't really helpful in those situations. And I think I found that a lot of times people just want to be acknowledged, and they just
Mm.
want to like you to listen to what they're saying. Um, which again, like what you're saying, like we're very action oriented cultures, but sometimes like action just means sitting with people, or holding their hand, or crying with them, or throwing shade so that they laugh.
That's me. Throw some shade.
um, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation. But in terms of depression, I mean, I'm not a clinical like therapist. Like that's not
Okay.
my background. But I would say, you know, like if you are experiencing things and you're having difficulty finding like people to have conversations with, like, you know, you could look for a therapist. But I also want to highlight too that like in terms of therapy, there's very few like Pacific Islander therapists, and so
Yes.
we definitely need to create a not a pipeline. Someone corrected me. We need to create a funnel. We need to invest in programs that invest in youth to go to school and train in these things, and not necessarily take on the Western theory of like therapy, but like really think hardly about what is a grassroots indigenous approach to healing, you know. And I just, sorry, I'm going off the boards now, but
No,
I was
I'm
thinking,
here for it because it all ties in. When people
yeah,
were in the shutdowns for COVID and all of these things, when they were dealing with the actual disease, if you were depressed before then, you were definitely depressed, or it emphasized after. When
yeah,
you're isolated, or when you're stuck in the same household with your family members 24/7 now, when you had that space to leave and kind of miss each other and come back, like a lot of things happened. Drinking went up, domestic
yeah,
abuse went up, pregnancy went up. So there was a lot of things that were happening during that time, and it's great to have young theologians, because a lot of Pacifica people, young people, are separating from the church, to be very honest.
yeah,
So it's good to have an example of someone who's like doing real tangible work, but still operating out of like a perspective that's out of theology, rather than
mm,
just our ego and just our subconscious selves. Sometimes like we act without thinking, so to be very intentional in what you believe, but showing it in very tangible ways to people who may not be believers, that
yeah,
they'll accept it, and that is perfect. Sometimes we just need to sit with people and let people be who they are, where they are, and maybe
yeah,
that's the best kindness those people have ever had. Because I can't tell you how many times when I'm going through something, people wanted me to be something else, like, oh well, you
mm,
just be happy, or why do you always have to be so critical all the time? And I'm sitting here like, this is just how my brain works. I can't
yeah.
change this. So I mean, what is something that you hold on to, that you draw from like your theological studies, or that just helps you get through the day?
Oof.
I know it's a tough question. I went deep. I was like, oh no, we're not gonna go deep. And then here's me with my oxygen tank. Let's go scuba diving.
Ooh, that is a great question. I'm trying to think. I think I'm trying to stay within this topic, but then also at theology. I think if I were to think, you know, like religiously, like thinking about Christianity, I think what I would want to share with folks is that like God desires your healing, you know,
Mm.
and I think I want to like peel back the layers of that, but like God desires like your healing in the fullness of who you are, you know, not just like physical healing, because I know people are always quick to do that, but God wants emotional healing, spiritual healing. um I think God desires all of that for us, and it takes different modalities. It looks differently for everybody. I think, you know, when I think about like COVID, right? One of the things about healing that I think about that happened was, you know, healing in our relationships with our own families. You know, when we talk about depression, also looking at like, have we experienced trauma in our lives? A lot of the work I do with the Allender Center is programming around like narrative focused trauma care. How do we get people to engage their stories of trauma through story? You know, like how do we help them build these narratives and help them tell these narratives confidently? I think that's really important. But you know, like I can't stress this enough, but like we're human beings. Like we're carnal, we're flesh. Like we have all things that we hold in our bodies. Like we don't think about that often, but it's so important. It's so important to be cognizant of what's going on. It's so important to
Mm.
be able to like recognize like when you're dysregulated or when you need to like pause. I think those are skills that necessarily aren't like really promoted in our households. I don't know. I don't want to speak for everybody, but you know, going back to the example of like spiritual bypassing, right? um, One of the things that I had to heal in myself and with my mom is just particularly our relationship is that propensity to like correct without us necessarily listening. One of the things that I had to adapt, and I shout out to my friend Altacia Westerlund. Um, you know, my mom is always quick to like respond, and I had to like sit her down and be like, you know, I appreciate your intentions, but like I in this moment I just needed you to listen. Like I didn't need
Mm.
feedback, you know. And that's one of the things that Sia has kind of taught me to ask is like, do you want when people approach me and want to have a conversation, it's like, do you want me to listen? Or do you want feedback? Because you know, if they just want me to listen, then cool. I know the expectation. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to listen to what you have to say. If they want feedback, that's a whole other thing, because then it's like you're giving me permission to speak into your life, and you know I didn't choose that, but you chose it, so now it's gonna happen. But you know, I wish I, I think I'm speaking to like Pacific parents, but I'm like, sometimes your children just need to like, they just want to be able to know that they can be held and to be vulnerable.
Mm.
Excuse me, be vulnerable with you, and not necessarily have to like prepare themselves for like what could be said, in anticipation for like, you know, their vulnerability. So small tidbit over here parenting when I don't even have kids.
I mean, look, I feel like we're able to give parenting advice because we know what it feels like to be a child to being parented. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
You'll see a lot of folks be like, "Oh, you won't know until you have children." I was like, I was a child though. I know what a mother's love feels like or doesn't feel
yeah.
like. I know what a father's love feels like, doesn't feel like. Like I think it's a conversation that we have to have between children and parents that especially in my perspective is highly informed from the Samoan culture. Like there is always this very hard hierarchy in that we have to break through to kind of get to those heart to heart conversations. Now, if you have a parent who's always had heart to heart conversations with you, then you're one of the lucky ones. But if you grow up in the like kind of like a military household where you do as I
Mm,
say, not as I do type thing,
yeah,
it can be very intimidating to sit your parent down and say, "Look,
yeah.
love you for what you had to say, but I just need you here." You know what I mean? I just need you
Mhm.
to listen. I that is so daunting to me. Like I'm 36 years old. I don't think I could sit down with my parents and be like, "Don't don't give me all your worries. Just listen to me. Just hear me and be here for me." I wouldn't be able to do that. So I think it's so it's so nice to have parents to kind of just sit and
Mm,
listen to you and be heard. Because Pacifica children are seen to be last to eat, last to get things. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And so I would my hope for the future is that they could be first, first to
Yeah.
be listened to, first to have the opportunity to go be who they want to be. The more space we give each other, the more possibilities we have to create. So I think that's really awesome to hear that you can do that with your mother. And that's why I'm so glad you're here. So you could just give an example to these kids. Like, sit down your parents and have a conversation. But it's tough for us folks that may not have a connection to their family.
Mm,
It's tough to reach back and try to correct things that have happened in the past, which
yeah.
is, it's kind of like COVID, right? Like, when you didn't take it seriously, when you thought it was just for play, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
now some folks have long COVID, meaning they have symptoms that they'll they'll be with them probably for the rest of their life or for quite some time because they went through what
Yeah.
they went through. Didn't wash hands, didn't wear masks, didn't wear whatever, all those things. Same thing with relationships. Like, when you didn't have the tough conversations, when you
Hmm.
didn't think those details were important, now they're coming back to kind of like haunt you, and you may or may not
Yeah.
have a relationship with your folks like you used to. So it's up to you to either dig deeper into that or keep it pushing. But that's kind of where I am in life, though, too. Because, like, as Pacifica people, we're so social, we're so
Hmm.
familial, like
Hmm.
family, friends is everything. What happens when you have to choose your own family? And I feel like that's where I am now.
Yeah.
Like, I have to try to choose my tribe, choose the people around me. But I would love to default to just blood. Oh, born here, born there, we're related.
Yeah.
Easy. It's so easy. But when you have to be put in a position where you're making hard choices, where you have to choose your tribe,
Hmm.
choose the standards in which you want to live, it gets muddy.
Yeah.
You're from Hawaii and you moved
Yep.
to Seattle. You kind of had to kind of choose your tribe too and kind of like build your community there. How was it to be this, island boy trapped in this landlocked kind of
Okay.
world in overcast? How was that for you?
I so yes, I was born and raised in Hawaii. I also want to acknowledge that, like, in my family, I had a lot of privilege in terms of traveling, right? Like, lived in LA, lived in Philadelphia, lived in New York. So the transition to Seattle, like, initially it was, I was excited because I was going to work with Pacific communities. Like, I was recruited into a nonprofit that was servicing Pacific Islanders. And, like, um, what I wasn't prepared for with Seattle, again, going back to like geographical location, was the winters are hard. I'm like, the winters are really difficult. Like, the lack of sun, being stuck inside, like, it's a thing. And but outside of that, I think the first year that I was here, I think I was doing really meaningful work within the Pacific community. For context, for those who don't know, I helped kind of build this leadership development program called the Oceania Leadership Institute. And over the course of a year, I got to journey alongside 25 Pacific Islanders from around not just the nation, but there was also someone international as well in American Samoa. And it was a really fascinating and rewarding experience. I approached it, I think much of my training is very academic, and so I approached it as an academic. But in the process, I realized, like, people are looking for community, right? This is fresh out of COVID. They're looking for community. They're looking for engagement. They want to talk about their identities as Pacific people, and specifically diasporic Pacific people. And so, I kind of had to, like, reconfigure the program to, like, address these needs that people were saying. But it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful to come alongside these folks. It was really beautiful to be able to, like, leverage resources, to be able to connect them with other folks who could potentially mentor them or introduce them into, like, different fields of work. I really, really, really valued that space, and I really appreciated it. And yeah, sorry, I'm in my feels right now. But what was the initial question?
Oh,
Transition.
no, like, you're just explaining how you were just picking your tribe and getting around people doing, solid work. I also noticed that you were in, a little bit of farming there. I saw you, break ground a bit. How was
Yes.
that for you?
Yeah. So this practice that I have, it happened actually during COVID. So again, came back from New York, was in Hawaii. Um, my brother again had passed away, and I didn't know what to do with the grief. It was compounded. I was carrying, like I was carrying family. I felt like I was carrying a lot of responsibilities, but then also just like what you were mentioning earlier, people didn't know how to process the loss of our brother. And my training in seminary, I feel like, and also as a hospital chaplain, kind of gave me the tools to create spaces within my family to be like, where are you right now and what are you feeling? But for myself, I was like, ooh, I need something else. And so, my mom had this yard, it was just dirt. And one day I just decided to, I was going to plant kalo. And so I kind of met up with some of my mahiai, my Hawaiian farmer friends, and we got like the huli, the uli. And I just, not knowing what I was doing, I just went, tilled the land, planted some kalo, put them in the ground, started planting, uala, mala, started planting just all kinds of things that I feel like if I'm hungry, I would want to eat this.
Yes.
And
I'm hungry
just
right now.
such a just such a huge appreciation for like our indigenous foods, but then also indigenous food systems and knowledges. And I really got to elevate Kanaka Maoli, right? I, as a settler, as someone who grew up in Hawaii and not Kanaka Maoli, I feel like I have immensely benefited from the knowledge of being in this space, not just like from people, but then again, like a spiritual connection to
Yeah.
like land and how it's informed my identity. But just watching how Kanaka have kind of interacted, engaged with Aina, and that kind of also informed my own understanding of like being Samoan and like what does that mean for me as a Samoan person? What does that mean for me as a Tokelauan person? Even being a Filipino person, my family were one of the first generations of Filipino immigrants to come to Hawaii and work in the plantations, and so
Nice.
just feeling this inherent ancestral call to like your people farmed, they gardened, they grew their food, and like you're over here ordering McDonald's, which is not a shame. I'm not shaming anybody for that, but like I just I just like what's the deeper thing happening here when I choose to plant this food, and then I get to when it's like I get to care for it and nourish it, and then when it's ready to like harvest, I get to share that with people. um One of the stories I just shared recently with one of my friends, and again, this goes back to mental health and just thinking about our communities. I have an uncle who lives with my family, my mom's brother, and one of the beautiful moments I remember, he came to live with us, and he was going through a hard time. He was struggling, and I remember when he came to come live with my mom at her house. Um, it was the week that I was harvesting the kalo. And I remember asking him like, "Oh, uncle, do you want to help me? Do you want to help me do like harvest this?" And he was like, "Okay, yeah, sure." So, I was cutting the luau, and like he was like cleaning off the kalo itself, the corn. And I like paused and I watched him as he was like cleaning and washing it off. And I started crying because in my mind, I was thinking about like, this is who you were meant to be. Like, this
Mm.
is this is your most deepest like ancestral identity as a Samoan, as a Tokelauan person. Like, this is what your ancestors did, and there's something about what you're doing right now in this very moment that is healing. And I pray that like that would take fruit, and now he takes care of my kalo back at home.
Oh,
um,
send me a
yeah,
bag, uncle, please.
I know, right? But yeah, I think there's something about our practices that are so monumental to who we are as people. And I think that's something that we in diaspora, because we don't have that connection to land, because we're here on the continent or in Australia and Aotearoa, like there's something about that like that needs to be nourished and cultivated, which is a prelude, like also a plug to the work that I do with the Yes Foundation of White Center. I'm a part of, we helped kind of grow this. We I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. We revitalized a community garden to a
Mm,
church that had like kind of died. It's called Alumni Gardens, and it's under the leadership of Pat Thompson, Margot Thompson, or Margot Fontaine as well. But like these really strong Pacific Samoan women who just were like, let's start a garden. And so we're in the process of, I think last year we broke ground and we created 8 beds. And then this year we're expanding it. We got more funding to kind of do this work. But yeah, just really thinking like, you know, I don't want us to lose this practice of connection to earth. Like, how
mm.
can we foster that? How can we cultivate that within young Pacific people?
That's a great question because I've seen, within the Black community, there's this like push to have urban gardens, urban like farms where we can address food deserts and things like that by teaching people how to grow their own fruits and vegetables and things like that. I think that could definitely be a route in which Pacifica people could be taught how to grow things and find a connection. To me, I didn't like being a plant mom, like honestly, because I just didn't want to be responsible for something eventually dying. Like that's my green
Ah,
thumb is very brown. It's very brown. But just watching something grow every day does me good. That brings me kind of joy because it's like, oh my gosh, not that I did that, but where me and this thing has a conversation that I understand. Like if I see a leaf come down a little bit, oh, it's time to water. You know what I mean? If the
mm,
soil goes dry, oh, okay, I need to tend to this, and things like that. So I think that's what a lot of people are missing is that conversation with Mother Nature again.
yeah.
Like we constantly feel the effects of it, but we don't know that like, hey, we can actually opt into a conversation with Mother Nature. Like
Mm,
she's telling you that something's wrong, we can actually address it. And I think a lot of young people or older people need to go back and talk with the earth again and see what's going on. I
yeah.
know you just tweet us for ordering McDonald's, but in the land
I
that we're in,
actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I think I wanted to revisit that and say, I apologize if that comment was out of pocket. That was never
no,
my
you're good.
intention. Obviously, there are systems in place in terms of poverty and racism and all these like structural issues that make food inaccessible. And so I definitely want to name those things. But I think what I was trying to like kind of get to the point of is like when you grow food, you really understand and create a greater appreciation for the process it takes. Like, when we think about strawberries, right? We're just over here eating them, that's fine. But do we really think about the hands that went into growing this and think about like the structural issues behind harvesting and, like all these other things? But all that to say, I still go to McDonald's, y'all, but I want to plug, I want to plug like, if it's just try something, throw something in the ground and see what happens, and if it dies, then it's fine. It still gets repurposed and the soil still uses it. But um, yeah, what is your connection to land? What is your relationship with earth? And how do you foster that? How do you cultivate that?
No, yeah, I didn't mean to make you apologize.
No,
I
no,
was just
it was already in my mind. I was like, I just hella shaded people for going to McDonald's, but I'm like, no, that's not what it was.
yeah, and then I mean there are societal structures and things that happen within society that push us towards making these choices that may not be the best health wise. But then there's also like, it tastes great.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'd be like, oh, it just tastes great. But the best food I've ever had wasn't fast food. It was food that took time, like food that took
Mm,
took ages. I had a conversation. I was just in Vegas, and I had a conversation with these two older white couple. Never in a million years did you think I would be sitting in a bingo hall with a couple in their 60s talking to them and just having a ball, but they were such sweet spirits. And
mm,
he was telling me like, yeah, my mom owned a restaurant and we grew our own beef. We
wow.
planted our own things. In the 40s, his mom, and though she was, a white woman in the 40s, she went off to France and studied under a chef, came back, and their restaurant has a Michelin star. I mean, the mom passed away, but her food was so good. There
Yeah.
was train tracks next to the restaurant.
Hmm.
The conductor would stop the train, take the crew off the train, go and order
Wow.
food, and then sit and eat, and then when they were done they'll leave. Like, your food isn't just food. Sometimes when you're serving food, you're serving love, you're serving comfort,
Mm,
you're serving care. And if you care about what you're making and then you serve that to people that you love, you're just emphasizing that love and that relationship, because you're feeding them so that they can go on and be stronger, better
yeah,
people, and go do work and feed their families. So
yeah,
I love this conversation about planting and being mindful about what we're eating, because it's not just what we take in and that's
hmm,
that. No, it's like you're the source of nourishment for other people. And if
yeah.
you care about them, then you got to care about what you put in their bodies too. So, Brandon,
I'm like,
ah,
you just gave a sermon right there. That's a sermon in itself.
well, the church will burn down if I step through the archway, but
Which church though? Because if well, actually, we won't get into that.
every church.
I don't
But
believe that for a second.
I don't know. Like, what pushed you? Because that makes me wonder too. Like, what pushed you to choose this route for your life in terms of, like, because you're preaching now, yeah? Are you giving sermons? Are you teaching?
For the first time, I preached a Good Friday service at Lake B, and yeah, when you ask this question of like what got me into this work, I mean, I always grew up. Um, my mother was very like religious, spiritual, whatever category you want to use for it. I grew up in like a pseudo evangelical Pentecostal background, and I feel like I've always known that like there was an invitation by God to like be involved in this work. And the more that I got involved with this work when I went to Bible college or my undergrad, I just became very disillusioned because a lot of the times, like religious leaders, like they won't address the social inequities that are like go hand in hand with faith, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
have these megachurch pastors. Again, not to throw shade. You have megachurch pastors who are totally content with these multi-million-dollar houses, but like some of their own congregation members are like houseless or can't afford to pay rent. In my context specifically, I think it was a combination of growing up poor, growing up being Samoan and Tokelau in a predominantly like Japanese American, Korean American, Asian suburb in Hawaii, and then also just realizing that like the social location of Hawaii, right? Like it was the descendants of missionaries, Christian missionaries, who were responsible for the overthrow. And there was, from my vantage point back then, it's like, are we not going to have a conversation about this? Like,
Yeah.
who's talking about these things? Like, how are we repairing the wounds that Kanaka Maoli would probably experience generationally for what has happened to them and how this land has been stolen? Um, in conjunction with that, I think when I was an undergrad as well, the school that I was going to was, and it was combined. It was connected to a church, a predominantly like a really popular church, and the church was considering like they were going through plans of like a multi-million dollar like redo of the building. Meanwhile, like 4 miles away in Kaka'ako, there are houseless Micronesian folks, Chukis, Marshallese folks who just don't have like spaces to live, and I saw this like there was a cognitive dissonance of like
Mm.
we're over here spending money on this building that is perfectly adequate. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but because like I don't know if it was like a parking situation or something, like you need something else for this building in order to like rev up your participants and your money and all that stuff. Because we'd rather spend money on this and not house people, like that fundamentally seemed wrong with how I moved in spaces. And so eventually I just I wasn't getting supported in the school that I was getting at, so I just started reading more people, not reading people like that, but like just started reading different authors. I was reading people.
Reading
But it's
people.
like but like yeah, I left and then I went to the most um progressive seminary in the country, and it was there where I got to really dive into these questions of what does it mean to be indigenous in Samoa or in Christian? Like how do we reckon with this historical past of violence, but then also like dealing with like I still believe these things and I still hold fast to these things, and how do I make sense of that? Which is really what theology is, right? It's faith seeking understanding, as someone would put it. But yeah, that's kind of my segue into this body of work.
That's good. Like, where can we see you preach? Where can we see you give messages? If you guys don't know, Brandon Tacadena is one of the most beautiful writers I've ever seen. So when I followed him on Facebook, that we never talk, we never whatever, I would look for his posts, and I was like, oh, why is this post 3-4 paragraphs long? I started off the first line. And I couldn't stop reading. If you want to read really good, just thoughts. I think you had written something about what you saw on a train, randomly saw on a train, I think was one thing, or where you were in public transportation, you randomly saw something and you was just talking, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I could read this forever. So I think people would benefit very much from hearing you speak. You are a jack of all trades in terms of like you farm, you're in with the land, but then you also farm with people. Like you try to grow seeds within people, new ideas. What does it mean to be grounded as a person? And then on top of that, you work so hard to try to get us back to our indigeneity and decolonizing the things that we learned that may not be good for us, but because we're in the environment, right? We're in environments that make us predisposed to certain things. We think a certain way, walk a certain way, talk a certain way, but we've lost some of that connection, to our Pacifica selves. This conversation comes up a lot with, especially with me and my sister, when we look at certain American struggles, like when Americans struggle with gender and sex and stuff like that. And then I go back and think about Samoans, and I'm just like, we already have the system. Like we have people of different genders who are in prominent places in office, and people find work and fulfillment and things like that. Like to look at the American struggle around gender and spirituality and all these things, I'm like, you guys are late. But yet we're the primitive ones. If you give it to the Western society, they'll look back on Pacifica people and be like, oh, you guys are behind. You guys are, you're not as advanced as you should be. And I'm sitting here like, we're advanced in things that matter. We're advanced in how to be good people. Now, there are other things that we need to learn because we just haven't been exposed to. But if you're a Pacifica person out there listening, you are the most advanced being on earth. Like you are. If you know what feels good, if you know how to make other people feel great and add value to their lives, if and not be distracted by some of the American talking points, then you're really above it all. Because at the end of the day, when we strip all the things that we depend on and all these superficial things, it's the person that you are that you have to sit and live with for the rest of your life. So take care of that person. And that's why we're having this Koviki Talk. Again, we're reminding you to take care of that person. Go to vaccines.gov, find your updated vaccine, take care of yourself. We can't change the culture. We can't change the culture. We can't change the world if you're not in it. So please be in it, my people. But Brandon, before we go, please let us know what's your social media, where we could find you preaching. You know what I mean? I need to catch a session.
I mean, I appreciate the plug. I haven't been as active on social media, and I think I want to raise this point, and I might catch some hands for this, but I just want to. I know that during the height of COVID, right, it was COVID, it was the death of George Floyd. I think it was a recharged space for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people were angry, and I think a lot of people are still angry, and I was angry, but I think in this time since then till now, what I kind of the wisdom that I would impart to folks, and I also am now realizing that I should be a part of this work as well, is it's super easy to burn the building down, but like, what is your commitment to rebuilding something back in its place? I think anger is valid. I think frustration is valid. I think trauma is valid. Like all of these things are valid, but like, I don't know if if you're cool with just tossing a match and burning something down and walking away, like that's cool. Blessings to you. Do what you need to do. But I think at this point in my life, the switch here is how do we build people up? How do we build new places? Right? Like I was just talking to Dacia the other day about like, hey, like what if we just buy like a huge plot of land in New Mexico and in anticipation for when climate change happens and people need to migrate, like just
Yeah.
like thinking about something like that, right? Like how do we build up? How do we validate people's angers and their bodies, but then also how do we build people up to where the work that's so desperately needed in our community is able to be done, right? We need therapists. How are we building up systems so that people can go to school, afford it to go to school, and not drown in student debt? We need farmers. How are we giving people tools and access to indigenous ways of thinking about farming? Like these are thoughts that I have in my mind, and I could probably like build out like 5 nonprofits on top of my head, but we also need just people to the fun stuff as well. So
Yes. Yeah. I feel a bit called out a bit because I love tossing the match. I love burning things down.
but you build up in your own way. You build up. I want to. Yeah, you're not a match tosser.
I'm a match tosser, but yeah, if you guys are looking at the screen, make sure you follow Brandon on his Instagram. Look out for his most insightful, just his writings, and if you ever catch him speaking, please listen because he's a captivated speaker. But before we go before we go out of here, I just want to remind you guys to make time for your health so you don't lose time for things that you love. So, an updated COVID vaccine restores protection that has decreased over time, including protection against severe illness, hospitalization, and the worst effects of COVID. So, remember, we talked about that long COVID. You guys really need to pay attention to those things and take care of those things because we love you and we want you around. So, if your last COVID vaccine or booster was before September 2022, it is time for an updated vaccine. So, find the updated COVID vaccines at vaccines.gov. Vaccines.gov as in Victor. And again, we can do this. And I know it's daunting when it comes to things like this, but we wanted to make sure you have people that look like you, sound like you, telling you what to do in terms of this. It's very new. Don't think that, oh, this is just, this is something that's never happened before. Pandemics have happened throughout history. If you're historically minded, you would know just for a bit that we've been through the influenza, we've been through polio, we've been through all of those things. So this is just what has gotten to us in the times. But I just wanted to say thank you, Brandon, for taking time out of your day to come and join us. It's lovely to see your face and to hear your voice. Again,
Thank
people,
you.
follow Brandon. I promise you won't be disappointed.
Thank you. And thank you again for all the work that you, Naki, Carl, Koviki Talk, and all the people behind the scenes. This is a very, very important resource and a vital resource for our community. And so thank you for all the labor that you folks do.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's it for us, my lofas. Thank you for hanging in with your girl, AfroTeine. And until next time, we'll talk to you later. Bye, y'all.